We start tonight with a consequential ruling from the Supreme Court in the birthright citizenship case. The court handing Donald Trump a major win, restricting the ability of lower courts to block his executive orders nationwide, specifically his ban on birthright citizenship, which has been stopped by every federal judge who encountered it. Said more plainly by these outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, this now limits the power of judges to stop Trump. The 6-3 decision, no surprise, was split along ideological lines. Trump appointee Amy Coney Barrett, writing for the majority, quote, "When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power too," adding that nationwide injunctions will be limited only in cases where they are, quote, "broader than necessary," meaning Trump's birthright citizenship ban will likely take effect in the 28 states that have not challenged the measure. Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson in separate scathing dissents, calling it, quote, "an attack and existential threat to the rule of law." Justice Sotomayor accusing the Trump administration of, quote, gamemanship, admonishing her colleagues for, quote, playing along and disregarding, quote, basic principles of equity. And Justice Jackson with a dire warning, quote, "executive lawlessness will flourish. Eventually, executive power will become completely uncontainable, and our beloved constitutional republic will be no more." Democratic lawmakers today are already slamming this decision.
The court has created a situation which we will not be able to easily unscramble. And secondly, they played right into the hands of Donald Trump.
The Supreme Court, the conservative court, trying to soothe his political ego, says, oh, well, we'll give you a procedural win on the equitable power of district courts, but he's going to continue to lose on the substance.
Joining me now is Leah Littman, law professor with the University of Michigan, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, and author of New York Times bestseller, Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. And Ankush Khardori, former federal prosecutor and senior writer with Politico. Thank you both so much for being here tonight. Leah, I'll begin with you. Were you at all surprised by this decision?
Unfortunately not. Based on the oral argument, it sounded like the Republican justices were willing to give the Trump administration a major win in allowing the administration to escape from what has been the most effective and powerful tool that lower courts have to ensure the administration is actually in compliance with the law. And unfortunately, this decision just follows a pattern of this court and specifically the Republican justices allowing the Trump administration and Republican presidents in general out from under the law and just giving them a free pass to violate laws they don't like.
Ankush, earlier today, we saw the Attorney General, President Trump, speak at length with reporters, speaking incredibly confidently, describing this as a complete and total win. And I want to play some sound of Attorney General Pam Bondi, specifically sort of suggesting that come October, they believe they're going to win the whole thing on birthright citizenship. Take a listen.
So birthright citizenship will be decided in October in the next session by the Supreme Court, unless it comes down in the next few minutes. That will be decided in October in the next session.
Ankush, is that even accurate? And then is this the complete victory that they believe it is?
Well, if she's suggesting it will be in October, she has no way of knowing that. It may be in the next term of the Supreme Court's term, which perhaps is what she was referring to. It was a striking press conference, I have to say, and I agree with Professor Littman. It was not particularly a surprise, but it was a major victory. But it was still sort of striking to see them just go on television and take a victory lap like this. It is a major victory. I would just point out that there are a few caveats that are worth keeping in mind as people sort of follow the litigation going forward. So first, the court did not resolve the standing of the states that have challenged the executive order. So there's still some chance that the states may be entitled to nationwide injunctions to protect their interests. That remains to be seen. Second, the court said that class action vehicles are still available. I'm quite skeptical, I have to be honest, that those are a good fit for a situation like this. But we've already seen that. Because there are very rigorous requirements for class actions in this country, including commonality and all sorts of legal requirements that require representatives to be lead plaintiffs to be representative of entire classes. And this is a situation where we could have people in multiple different sorts of situations that are impacted by this order. And the Supreme Court for years now has been making it harder for people to bring class action. So I found it a little galling, quite honestly, for them to be acting like this is an adequate substitute when everyone on that court knows that it's become much harder to file class actions in recent years. And then third, this does not apply to the birthright citizenship case, but the court did not resolve whether courts have the ability to set aside executive agency actions under the Administrative Procedures Act. Many of the injunctions that have been issued against the Trump administration since the start of the term have also been issued under the APA. Now, that is probably going to be the next front in this battle, but the ruling today technically does not disturb those. So in that respect, I think perhaps they oversold the victory here because it's not like a clean win for them.
Leah, do you think we're likely to see a sort of patchwork system of laws and rights in the United States? I mean, are we going to see a country in which if you live in a red state, you have a very different set of rights than if you live in blue states? Are we going back to something like separate and unequal?
I think we are. I think we are already living in that world. Ever since the Supreme Court overruled Roe versus Wade, we have already been living in a country with a patchwork of protections where people have rights in some places and not in others. And I think this decision is only going to exacerbate that, because while the Supreme Court held open the possibility for obtaining nationwide injunctions in some cases, there's no question that this decision will limit their availability. And so what that means is for some Trump administration policies that are wildly illegal, that courts have determined are indeed unlawful, if Republican-led states didn't challenge those policies, well, then the Trump administration is probably going to be able to implement those policies in those states as to people who, for whatever reason, were not able to find a lawyer and challenge the policy as applied to themselves. This is creating what Justice Jackson called at oral argument a catch-me-if-you-can system, where you can only hold the executive branch accountable to the law if you personally manage to sue them and prevent them from violating your rights and violating the law in your case.
Ankush, I just spent the other day hours out on the streets of New York with people protesting under the banner of No Kings, very concerned about the expansion of power in the executive branch. Do you see this as part of sort of that pattern, that direction that our country, our system seems to be moving?
Unfortunately, I do think it's consistent with that view. I mean, if this had come down in a totally different context or a vacuum, there would be arguments in favor on both sides of this question of nationwide injunctions. But it is the particular context in which this arises that I think is so striking. And, you know, because as Justice Sotomayor pointed out, every court that's addressed this issue has concluded that it's unconstitutional. Every serious academic or legal observer who's considered the issue has concluded the executive order is unconstitutional. And so, and yet, you have the majority kind of acting like none of that matters. I mean, explicitly telling us that none of that matters actually to their resolution of the case, and making no effort. I mean, this I found really striking, making no effort to consider the practical implications in this context, this particular birthright citizenship executive order. I mean, there are very serious stakes here. In the worst case scenario, if this doesn't get blocked sort of in a very comprehensive way, we could have children born in this country stateless, which is a shocking possibility and a very unsettling one. And those people could be deported to who knows where.
Leah, do you think that pregnant women in this country, in this moment, should be concerned about this and what the practical ramifications of this could look like in the coming months?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that the civil rights organizations that challenge this executive order are scrambling to try to ensure that this administration is not actually going to be able to implement it. They have already refiled a case as a class action and asked for an emergency restraining order for a court to be issued expeditiously. That being said, there is no guarantee that courts are actually going to reissue what are in effect nationwide injunctions. There's also no guarantee that this Supreme Court Court would allow what are effectively nationwide injunctions to be issued in this case. I think the justices have revealed themselves to be quite hostile to the Reconstruction Amendments and the civil rights that they guarantee. It was last year that the Supreme Court told us states can't actually enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which prohibits people from holding office if they were engaged in insurrection or rebellion. And just now, they selected this case involving the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, the foundation of a multiracial democracy at the heart of Reconstruction. They chose this case as the opportunity to really strike a death blow for courts' ability to hold the administration accountable to the law. And I think the fact that this court has a really disturbing pattern of attacking the Reconstruction Amendments and the civil rights should make everyone extremely concerned.